Okay, so let me ask you something. Where does the teenager actually come from? I mean, we all just assume it's a part of life, right? Like learning to walk or talk. But what if I told you that's not the whole story? Not even close. The real story is way more surprising. It's an idea that was basically born out of total chaos, a time when society looked at its youth and saw either angels or, well, demons. And it all kicked off at a pretty simple but world-changing question.
Right. What if the entire idea of being a teenager, that whole messy, rebellious, passionate time, wasn't a biological certainty, but a human invention? Something that was created pretty much from scratch less than 150 years ago. It's a pretty wild thought, isn't it? And if it's true, it kind of changes everything we think we know about growing up.
So, before the late 19th century, this timeline was basically your life. There was no gap year, no finding yourself. You were a kid, you learned the family business or the farm work, then boom, puberty hits, and that's when the real struggle for survival begins. By 15, you were an adult, period, full stop. You were expected to work, get married, and handle all the responsibilities that came with it. The switch was fast, and honestly, pretty brutal. There was just no in between.
And then, the Industrial Revolution just turns the world upside down. Cities exploded. They became these massive, chaotic, anonymous places. And for the first time in history, you have huge numbers of young people who are essentially on their own. Not much school, even less adult supervision. This urban chaos became the perfect petri dish for a new kind of person to emerge. Someone society had never, ever seen before.
So society looks at this new, untamed generation and sees two totally opposite things at once. First up, the monster. In the chaos of these new cities, youth crime wasn't just a problem. It was a source of this deep, moral panic. To a lot of people, these weren't just kids acting out. No. They were seen as a terrifying new threat to civilization itself. And if you want to understand just how freaked out people were, just listen to this quote. Okay, so Herostratus was this guy in ancient Greece who burned down one of the wonders of the world just to get famous. And in 1911, a writer says that the modern version of that guy wouldn't be burning down a temple. He'd join the Apaches, the name for the feared youth gangs in Paris. That's how scary they seemed. The face of this monster, for many, was a kid named Jesse Pomeroy. When this 15-year-old was convicted of murder, society didn't just see a criminal. They saw something infrahuman, a genetic step back. They saw him as the direct result of this brutal new urban world. He wasn't just one disturbed kid. He was a symptom of a whole society they thought was decaying.
But here's the crazy part. At the very same time society was terrified of this monster, it was also completely captivated by the total opposites, the genius. This was the young person who wasn't a destroyer, but a creator. Someone who is rebelling against the old, stale world to create something new and exciting.
And the face of this genius? A young artist and writer named Marie Bashkirtseff. Her rebellion didn't happen on the streets with a weapon. It happened in the pages of her diary. She wrote with what she called an extraordinary sincerity, trying to strip away all the lies and phoniness she saw around her. She was literally inventing a new kind of self-awareness, a new consciousness, a whole new way to be young. So you've got these two extremes happening at the exact same time. On one side, society sees a monster like Jesse Pomeroy, a destroyer born from the fear of the city. And on the other, it sees a genius like Marie Bashkirtseff, a creator, a symbol of artistic hope. You can just feel the confusion, right? Is this new generation going to be humanity's doom, or is it our salvation? And look, this wasn't just a handful of individuals. Whole subcultures, like the Bohemians, were basically building a new lifestyle around this very idea. They set up artistic communities, they threw out society's old rulebook, and they deliberately, consciously, delayed becoming adults so they could chase personal freedom. They were, in a way, the first people to declare themselves teenagers, choosing to live in that messy space in between. So this was the huge question hanging over the late 19th century. What is this new force that's shaking up our society? Are they monsters, or are they geniuses? This state of confusion, it couldn't last. Society was desperate for an answer, a framework, a category, just some kind of explanation for what was happening to its own children.
And that's when science stepped in. To try and solve this riddle of heaven and hell playing out on the city streets, society turned to psychology to finally put a name and maybe some logic to all the chaos.
And here it is. This is the big turning point. In 1898, a psychologist named G. Stanley Hall gives this confusing, unnamed gap a scientific label: adolescence. And his key insight was brilliant. He said this stage wasn't just about biology. It was an idea that society itself had constructed. He argued that we literally created adolescence with our own fears and our own hopes. He didn't find it in a lab. He defined it into existence, giving a formal name to this new period of life.
And get this, he defined it as the period from age 14 all the way to 24. An entire decade of life that just hadn't officially existed before was suddenly put on the map. And in that moment, the modern teenager was born, not in a hospital, but inside a psychology textbook.
But once something has a name, it becomes real, you know? It becomes a force you have to deal with. And the invention of the teenager really set the stage for a whole new kind of conflict in the 20th century, a battle for its very soul.
Because think about it, once you give something a name, you can interact with it, you can study it, you can influence it. The teenager suddenly became way too important to be left alone. It was now this new territory to be controlled, a new market to be sold to, and a new generation to be conscripted for wars and industries. The simple act of defining youth made them a target.
Which leaves us with a really critical question. The teenager was invented. The territory was officially mapped out. So, who was going to get there first? Who was going to win the race to control this brand new stage of life, and by doing that, maybe shape the future itself?